Good morning. This is Glenn Blackman. This is Glenn Blackman. Can anybody hear me on the call?
This is Philip. Glenn, I'm hearing you.
Oh, good.
Yep, can hear you.
I can hear you.
Excellent.
Good morning, Glenn. I can hear you too.
Okay. Looks like we've got 13 people on the call, myself included. And we'll give it a few more minutes to get started. Just let some other people join in. I put the rule document up. Those of you who are doing this over your computer, are you able to see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
I'm having trouble, but I think it's me.
Well, and it is something that is available to you already. It's not like a new document or even it's nothing that I created today.
Okay.
Again, this is Glenn Blackman with the Department of Commerce, and we're going to wait just a few more minutes before we start because for the people are coming in the door, so to speak. All right, well, I think I'm ready to get started. Good morning, everybody. This is Glenn Blackman with the Washington State Department of Commerce. And this event today is an opportunity to do, kind of a brief check-in with stakeholders about the rule language that we've been developing to implement a couple of kind of early action items within Senate Bill 5116, or the Clean Energy Transformation Act. the two pieces of that we're trying to develop rules for and get those adopted during this calendar year have to do with the incorporating incremental hydro from federal projects into the eligibility under the Energy Independence Act, and also updating language to reflect the changes in the renewable energy credit language that's in that law, the Energy Independence Act law. And then in a different area to establish the cost values for consumer-owned utilities to use in planning and resource evaluation for the cost of greenhouse gas emissions, the societal or social cost of those emissions. So we're working from a document that is dated September 23rd. It's available on our website, and so it's the version 2 of our rule language. It's got a short little memo at the top that summarizes the changes that occurred from the first draft to the second draft, and then there's a summary of the comments and our response to those comments, and then there's a rule language itself where we tried to show the effect of the changes. Sometimes it gets to be a little bit confusing to show effects of changes because of the we're talking about a change from the first draft to the second draft versus a change from current law to this, the second draft. And so that's for us, in particular, the case with the renewable energy certificate one, where we've got a change that is from the first to the second. And so I used highlighting there to try to show that. So does anybody have any questions about, the documents themselves, or they're not sure, if they're looking at the right thing or anything like that, before we get to questions about the content of the documents? Okay. And so we've got 35 people on the call here. So, we're going to have to do our best to avoid stepping on each other, in terms of talking or whatever. If you're using the web access and you want to type in a comment or a question, feel free to do that. And otherwise, let's identify ourselves when we talk, and try to accommodate each other's desire to comment or ask questions. Assuming that there are some. I mean, sometimes everybody shows up because they want to see what other people are going to say, and they don't actually have anything to say. But I bet that's not the case here. So if there is anybody who wants to get us started with, and maybe we should say that we're going to, kind of the order that we're going to do these. And so I've got on the screen the federal incremental hydro language. So let's just start with that one and see if there are any questions or comments that anyone has on that. Oh, and I did want to remind people that we're recording this, and we'll put the recording up on the website later, but just please do be aware that it's being recorded. All right, the floor is open. I just typed a comment in the comment box just to reassure myself that it's working. So, because I didn't see any comments over there either. Well, the federal hydro part is something where we haven't. The comments that we've received in writing have pretty much been reassuring us that we were correctly implementing the law. There was a little bit of comment in the realm of kind of wishful comments that parties wished that we could also make non-federal, non-utility incremental hydro eligible, and we expressed that we couldn't go beyond what the legislature had given us in that area, but within the boundaries of the federal law, or the provision regarding federal projects, people seemed like we'd done okay on the language. So one more chance on that, or if not, I'll move to the next section, 120, which is the renewable energy credits. Okay, then let's talk about renewable energy credits. In that section, we added the word stored in subsection 1C. This is compared to the previous draft in response to a comment about that they were concerned that someone might argue that electricity that's used to store energy might adversely affect the validity of the REC. The other language in this provision is unchanged. In this particular section is unchanged from the first draft. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the definition one in 0402 because it goes together. There we're defining the word vintage because we use it in that earlier section, and there had been some comments before we started the rulemaking about weren't quite sure what vintage meant in that context. And we had originally said it means the month and year in which the electricity is generated, and that's consistent with the way vintage is used in the renewable energy credit tracking system. And there were comments from several stakeholders that suggested we take the month part out because under the Washington law, the eligibility is, to the extent it's based on vintage, it's the year only, the month isn't relevant. And so we decided to take the reference to month out there. So how about in this section, these two together, are there comments or questions about that?
Glenn, this is Wendy Gerlitz from Northwest Energy Coalition.
Good morning, Wendy.
Good morning. I would like to raise an objection to the addition of the word stored in that sub 1C. I think that while we looked at the intent of the commenter and would generally agree with the notion that they are putting forward, we do not think that this is the correct place in statute to deal with this, nor do we feel like the addition of that language is at all linked back to any language in CETA that we could find. And so we just don't think this is the right place. We think this muddies this subsection's intent here by adding the word stored. And so we would prefer to see that removed.
Okay. And if that, I mean, the idea that what we're trying to do here is just the things that are, you know, kind of specifically driven by the change in law in those two sections of Senate Bill 5116, then yeah, you know, there's no changes in the 2019 legislation that affect the eligibility of due to storage one way or the other. It's something that we could address later when we get to, you know, when we get to the point where we know more about what the CETA rules are, and we're trying to harmonize or streamline the EIA rules and the CETA rules. So it is possible that we could defer this question about, you know, storage, you know, making it clear that storing energy doesn't affect the REC. Anyway, are there other comments about Wendy's concern? Okay, I'm glad we're not doing this as like a morning talk show or something, because it'd be pretty uninteresting. I mean, I guess that's true,
Good
even if you
morning,
guys.
Glenn.
Hey, who is that?
This is Eleanor with Washington Environmental Council. I can just say I took a look at that in talking with Wendy, and I agree that it might not be the right spot to add that allowance for storage. So echo her comments here.
Okay.
This is Paul Brockpole from Lavely. I'm just wondering, based on those comments, whether there's a substantive objection to what we're trying to get at versus the right spot where this should be. Because what I'm hearing is no objection to the substance of the language.
Yeah, I don't know that there is not necessarily an objection to the substance of what you're trying to do, but I think it does warrant thinking more carefully about how we integrate it into the statute, and I am objecting to this particular location of statute.
Okay.
This is Todd with CRS. Can you please explain the substance of the comment a little bit more, please?
So I think that's directed to you, Paul.
Okay. Yeah. We wanted to make sure that storage of energy that's generated by a renewable would retain the characteristic of the attributes, the green attributes, as when it was generated. So that's the objective.
This is Johnny from North Energy Coalition. Just a further clarification, Todd, do you mean stored like in a battery or a pump storage unit, or stored as, say, renewable hydrogen?
Battery.
Or, okay, thank you.
And this is Philip Popoff. I was just wondering, would you factor into that somehow that you know, in the existing hydro system, right? That you could take that energy and store water up behind the dam, some kind of mechanism for doing all that kind of accounting?
That wasn't the focus of my comment.
So, sorry, this is Todd again. So are you saying that if energy from a renewable facility is stored, what are you suggesting, or how are you suggesting that the REC accounting should work with respect to claims on that megawatt hour of renewable generation?
We haven't gotten that far. All we're saying is that we want to avoid the implication that RECs are no longer valid if renewable energy is stored.
So my only comment would be you'd want to avoid a double count, right? So if the electricity from a renewable generator is stored and that storage facility is reporting that they are storing that renewable electricity and then discharging renewable electricity, we think that the RECs should be involved in that accounting, in which case there may be a double count if both the storage facility and a different REC owner are both reporting delivery and or consumption of renewable energy, one with the REC and one without. So that's why I'm further clarification on what on sort of the allocation of the REC or the accounting involving RECs in the case that the electricity from a renewable generator is stored would be helpful.
Yeah, we haven't gotten that far yet, but I see your point.
Okay, this is Glenn again, and I do. To me, it makes sense that this is an issue that could be deferred. One reason why I feel like that is I think we're in good shape in terms of kind of the way the REC system is being implemented today, that RECs are created based on generation, and so that can occur before the electricity is put to any use, including storage. And so the REC creating people don't really have to worry about whether it's used for pushing chemicals from one side of a battery to another or for some other purpose. But there may be that that we do need to address it more thoroughly later. So I had seen this language as kind of harmless, and in this case, maybe it is harmless, but also for that same reason, it could be delayed for a while till we can discuss it more thoroughly.
Glenn, this is Philip. I guess the other question that I had, right along those lines that you're talking about, and I don't need to keep talking about it, but is that as the REC generator, great, my wind blew, the sun shined, and I got the electricity. As a compliance, what I get for compliance, if I put that into a battery and there's losses, are the RECs coming out of what came out of the battery, or I get to count I get to count the RECs going into the battery? It seems like that would have to be pretty clear.
Yeah, and I think that today, unless the battery is behind the point where you measure your generation, then it's the electricity going into the battery that gets a REC created on its behalf, and the losses that occur in the battery are, they don't affect the creation of the REC in the first place. I think as far as RECs are concerned, a battery is more like a consumption event than a production event.
This is Todd. We agree that RECs shouldn't be issued to standalone storage, but there are questions. The accounting with respect to RECs in terms of whether or not the accounting would be different in the case that a consumer is looking to make a claim that they're using renewable energy, or if a storage facility is reporting that they are discharging renewable energy, then, for example, a case where you're trying to use storage to shift renewable generation from one time period to another. We've done some thinking about the REC accounting that you would need to do in either case. And so I think that to the extent that we can agree that RECs aren't issued to standalone storage facilities, there's so many different variations in terms of the co-locating storage with renewable generation, and where the meter is, that there are important questions to ask with respect to renewable generation that's stored and potentially used for compliance by a storage facility, or the RECs associated with electricity that is ultimately stored. So I'm just wondering if you're planning to address those questions or sort out that accounting as a part of this, or if otherwise you could sort of interpret. I understand that objection's been raised to this particular, to the addition of the word stored in this particular place, but could you just interpret for me what this would be saying if you added the word stored here? What the requirement would be?
Are you asking that of me, Todd?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess what I would say is what I understand current practice to be, and that is that RECs are created based on the quantity of electricity that's generated, and the fact that the utility, kind of how that electricity was used or disposed of, including whether it was used for storage, has no effect on the eligibility of the certificate itself. And so, we don't have any situations that I know of where storage is assigned RECs, in and of itself, kind of either in addition to or in lieu of the REC that was created at the point of generation. So it's not, it's not something that's ever come up. I'm just not aware of any questions that have come up about how storage might affect the eligibility of a REC. So that's kind of current practice, and I know that there's always new ideas and innovation and new technologies out there, and this may need some work in the future, and we'd be open to discussing it more as we move along. But yeah, so, and if there are other jurisdictions where this is, we've seen where there have been kind of complicated questions come up about it, then we could learn from that too.
Sure, we could discuss that. I mean, I'd be happy to share some of our experience in thinking. One place that I'd point to is Massachusetts, where they're currently trying to implement a clean peak standard that would involve storage. RECs are not the compliance instrument there, but they're developing a new similar instrument, a clean peak certificate, that there are questions about sort of compliance related to renewable generation that is stored and ultimately dispatched during a clean peak period. So during a peak period. So those questions, I recognize the point that you're making, that that for this program, the REC, is issued to a generator and is ultimately used for compliance. However, I feel like with the increase with storage, in the sort of growth in storage and batteries on the grid, I think there may be questions around the claims that that customers that or either storage facilities or customers that are using electricity that was stored can make with or without RECs, and that there may be some compliance or accounting implications or effects. So I think it's a good question to ask. And my question for you was, if the word stored is added here or elsewhere, how would that change the requirement as it's written here?
I mean, I didn't see it as changing it at all. That it was just providing another example of how electricity might be unbundled from the REC, and that so the rule, which is not a new rule, it's just existing language saying that if the that the REC exists in an unbundled form when the utility has transferred the electricity to somebody else. And wouldn't that include storage? Yes, it would, but there's lots of other things it includes. And so reasonable minds can differ about whether to call out stored as one particular instance of unbundling.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to switch us over here to social cost of greenhouse gas in particular, because I think there's, there were more issues brought up in this area, and so there may be more need for discussion on that one. Plus, I think some people were going to sleep when we were talking about RECs. All right, so this is all, would be a new chapter in the Washington Administrative Code, and eventually it will be populated with whatever rules that we come up with for the Clean Energy Transformation Act. And so because of that, it's got a couple of sections at the start that we added in this draft to, that come basically from needing to create a new chapter. So, we've got one about purpose and scope, and then we have one that makes clear that this is primarily rules concerning consumer-owned electric utilities. The investor-owned utilities would be following rules that the Utilities and Transportation Commission eventually adopts. And the reason in that 020 that it says unless specifically provided otherwise is that we know of at least one provision about reporting where the statute says that all of the utilities will need to report to the Department of Commerce on their compliance with CETA, or I don't remember exactly what the provision says. But anyway, we envisioned that there could be a rule or two that actually applies to investor-owned utilities, even though for the most part that won't be the case. And of course, when we write that rule, if we come to that, then we're going to need to be specific and say that consumer-owned utilities and investor-owned utilities should do that thing, that reporting or whatever it might be. And then in the rule itself, which we gave the number 100, since the last draft, and so here the red line shows changes from the first draft to the second draft. And one of those changes was to specify the inflation factor to use in adjusting the cost values. So we've designated the implicit price deflator for GDP. This is the same inflation factor that the UTC has adopted in its direction to the investor-owned utilities. And then we expanded on the illustrative provision that we provided in subsection 3, where the actual requirement is stated. It's referring to that federal document, but just for convenience, we put the numbers from that document into the draft rule. And then going a step further in convenience, we also put the inflation adjusted values for 2018 only in there, just to help people see what the numbers look like, make it a little easier for them to find them, things like that. And then we did a little bit of wordsmithing or rearranging without any substantive change. But anyway, so that's where we are with the second draft. Are there questions or comments about this rule? Any concerns about it? I mean, I know that we did have some differences in terms of how much prescription that we should do in this rule versus discretion. So I just want to make sure people have the chance to express their views if they feel like they want to. I'm not going to make anybody do that, but.
Glenn, this is Steve Taylor from Palace PUD.
Steve, go ahead.
So just a very technical question. So you have an IRP that is due, is going to be submitted in 2020. Are we going to be using the $74 number that is showing in 2020 for the values that extend over that, let's say, next 10-year period showing cost models and all that? Or as we develop the IRP, would we say that a cost associated with, let's say, 2022 has to be adjusted further by the implicit price deflator, or would we just be using that $74 number for the IRP that we are submitting in 2020?
This is Glenn. Yeah, this is Glenn, and the way I understand this to work is that in the IRP, all the different cost values need to be put onto a common base. So maybe your model is using costs that are expressed in 2020 dollars, and so you get everything put into that that base value, and then do the analysis from there. And of course, then a cost that is incurred in a different year, like say 2030, for the social cost of carbon, it's going to be, emissions that occur in 2030 are more costly than the ones that occur in 2020. But getting them into the base year is kind of a first step, and it wouldn't necessarily be the 2018 values, like in the example I just gave where you were doing things in 2020 dollars. It'd be a different number. You'd need to get it up to the 2020 nominal value instead of the 2018 value. But that's why you have a consultant to figure out those details.
Yeah. So no, I just want clarity on that part, and that answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah. And so the UTC is they're going to be each year updating the values to reflect, into the most recent available base year. We're not planning to do that. We're just offering one illustrative conversion, from 2007 up to 2018. But we'll make sure the UTC's calculations are handy for us all.
Great, thank you.
Glenn, this is Tashiana with CGP. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Hi. I was wondering, I believe the UTC is allowing utilities who are already conducting their modeling, the investor-owned utilities already conducting their modeling for their IRPs, to continue to use whatever inflation factor that they're using. I think that PacifiCorp is doing a 50-50 blend of CPI and GDP, and I think the others have a different approach. How do you envision that working for the consumer-owned utilities if they're already working on the modeling for the IRPs? Do they, when do this work, essentially?
Yeah, I remember that question coming up when the UTC adopted their publication of the updated cost values, whenever that was, sometime in September, and I was asked about that. In fact, whether I thought it was a bad idea to allow for some transition, some grace during the transition period. And I recall saying that it didn't really make that much difference, kind of one time through like that. And so that I didn't have any concern about if the UTC was going to provide that sort of flexibility. And, so I would guess that for the consumer-owned utilities, the auditor, whoever's checking their compliance with the statute, will also show some flexibility on that point first time through.
Thank you.
Dr. Blackman, this is Kevin Galki from the Energy Authority.
Speaking of the consultant, how about that? Morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Dr. Blackman.
I hope I didn't butcher the discussion of base years too badly.
No, I think we're good to go there. My question is, and this may be a methodology question, have you put any thought to where in the process the social cost of carbon needs to be modeled, and over what geographic region?
I have put some thought into it, but I'd rather not get into that on this call. I'd like to wait until the written comments have come in, the October 30th comment event, where people have reflected on the discussions that we had at that last workshop, and will be, they have the opportunity anyway to do written comments on those methodology questions. So I'm looking forward to discussing those, but I feel like we should hold them until people have a chance to put in those comments.
That works for me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess one last chance for comments on social cost of greenhouse gas emissions. All right, well, it's customary at this point for people to say, well, what's next? And so I will tell you that for these particular rules, um, we've run them by our attorney, and there's a word or two non-substantive that she wants us to change, and it's actually more about the creating this new chapter than anything else. But so I think we're going to take that stored word out and put it into our future file, and then we will move into the formal process of issuing a proposed rule that then stakeholders have the opportunity to comment on that proposed rule. And then there'll also be a public hearing where people can testify on the proposed rule. And that'll put us on schedule to adopt the rule in its final form by the end of this year. I don't have a date for you right now about when that proposed rule will go out and when the hearing will be, but I'll get that to you soon so that you can put it on your calendars. And I guess that's our closing music right there. Oh, okay. Anyway, so any other questions, process or schedule-wise? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for participating, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.